really thankful that Jared said everything he said to you already about the resurrection of the body, because I'm going to be talking to you about life everlasting. And what I want to do is to try to fire up your imagination a little bit. Because I think that when we think about life everlasting or heaven, we somehow picture it as a sort of eternity-long worship service. And I enjoy worship services, really enjoy the worship service we have here, but honestly, if that's all it is, I might not get real happy about it. So what I want to do is to maybe try to encourage you to fire up your imaginations a little bit and to try to imagine something that you've never experienced. But, may the Lord help us. Before we start, I want to quote that great 20th century prophet and poet John Lennon, who said, "Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us, only sky. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion, too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger, a brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world." You may say that I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will be as one. As much as I love the Beatles, I have to tell you, since I have the microphone, that my grandson, Wesley, who's my eldest grandson, took me to see Paul McCartney this last summer, and it was one of the most wonderful experiences of my life, going to see Paul McCartney with my grandson. What's better than that? Well, this is better than that, right? But it was really wonderful, and I really do love the Beatles and John Lennon, but I have to say that his song Imagine is one of my least favorite songs, really, of all songs. Lennon isn't a dreamer in this song, though he claims that he is. He's living without dreams or imagination, and he thinks that the answer to death and war and greed and hunger is in living for today only with this material world in view. But he's so wrong. In fact, the answer to all the world's ills is the very thing that he asks us to imagine doesn't exist. If you believe that this material world is all that there is, then you will certainly war and plunder and seek to get rather than give. But if, on the other hand, you believe that this world is merely a shadow of what is to come, then you can live freely and generously and hopefully and joyously, because you know this isn't all there is. So now, with the help of another 20th century poet and prophet, C.S. Lewis, I'd like to begin to fire up your imagination a little bit. Now, I'm going to read something from him where he set up a way of thinking about this world and how difficult it is for us to think about that world, but he sets up a scenario for us to begin to understand what it is, how it is that we are living now. He wrote, "Let us construct a fable. Let us picture a woman thrown into a dungeon. There, she bears and rears a son. He grows up seeing nothing but the dungeon walls, the straw on the floor, and a little patch of the sky seen through the grating, which is too high up to show anything but sky. This unfortunate woman was an artist, and when they imprisoned her, she managed to bring with her a drawing pad and a box of pencils. As she never loses the hope of deliverance, she is constantly teaching her son about that outer world which he has never seen. She does it very largely by drawing him pictures. With her pencil, she attempts to show him what fields and rivers and mountains and cities and waves look like on the beach. He's a dutiful boy and does his best to believe her when she tells him that the outer world is far more interesting and glorious than anything in their dungeon. At times, he succeeds. On the whole, he gets on tolerably well until one day he says something that gives his mother pause. For a minute or two, they're at cross purposes. Finally, it dawns on her that he has, all these years, lived under a misconception. But, she gasps, you didn't think that the real world was full of lines drawn in lead pencil. What? Says the boy. No pencil marks there? And instantly, his whole notion of the outer world becomes a blank. For the lines by which he alone was imagining it have now been denied of it. He has no idea of that which will exclude and dispense with the lines, of that which the lines were merely a transposition, the waving of the treetops, the light dancing on a lake, the colored three-dimensional realities, which are not enclosed in lines, but define their own shapes at the very moment with a delicacy and multiplicity which no drawing could ever achieve. The child will get the idea that the real world is somehow less visible than his mother's pictures. But in reality, it lacks lines because it is incomparably more visible. So with us, Lewis writes, we know not what we shall be, but we may be sure we shall be more, not less, than we were on earth. Our natural experiences are only like the drawing, like penciled lines on flat paper. If they vanish in the risen life, they will vanish only as pencil lines vanish from the real landscape, not as a candle that's put out, but as a candle flame which becomes invisible because someone has pulled up the blind, thrown open the shutters, and let in the blaze of the risen sun. John writes in the book of Revelation, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and there was no longer any sea. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is among men, and he will dwell among them, and they shall be his people, and God himself will be among them, and he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will no longer be any death. There will no longer be any mourning or crying or pain. The first things have passed away. He who sits on the throne said, "Behold, I'm making all things new." And he said, "Write, for these words are faithful and true." Then he said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, and I will give to the one who thirsts from the spring of the water of life without cost. He who overcomes will inherit these things, and I will be his God, and he will be my son." This is the word of the Lord. So this is what I want to do right now. I want you to imagine, but not like Lennon told you to. I think it's good for us to do this because, like John Lennon, we're longing for a different world. Longing for a different world. But I long for one free from sin. And I think that the only thing that will motivate and sustain me to live a life of love is to think about what's coming. So, if you'd like to close your eyes, you may do that. I'm not telling you to. And if you if you sleep, that's fine. If you're snoring loud, the person next to you will nudge you, and that's fine as well. Imagine this. After the most delightful rest in paradise, your body is resurrected, taking to itself your DNA from this purified planet, and it becomes what it was supposed to be here on the new earth. Having been planted in the ground like a seed of some sort, it has been transformed into beauty and majesty and strength, like a tree that flourishes by the side of a river, and you will never ache again. When you stand up after sitting for a while at a conference, you won't groan or wish that you could still run up a hill and see a certain view that you long to see. Imagine that you'd actually be strong enough to make it and not run out of breath or give up before you start. You'll never look at yourself in a mirror. I mean, how great will that be? You'll never look at yourself in a mirror or wish you looked different or felt embarrassed about how you look or ashamed of how you look or even proud of how you look. You won't care about those things at all because you will know that you have been made glorious by Jesus, and this poor tent which you now inhabit will have been replaced by never-ending glory. Your mortality will be swallowed up by immortality and eternal life. Imagine that. Imagine a world where the music we sang earlier goes on forever, where you won't be picky about the song choices. You won't wish it was louder or quieter. You won't get distracted and wonder how long it took Bill Brimmer to grow his beard, or how off-key the guy next to you is, or how your feet are aching and you wish you could sit down, but then you wouldn't be able to see the words because you'll know all the words, or you're nervous about the schedule or who's taking care of your kids, or whether you shouldn't have eaten that extra pastry this morning, and what that might mean about who you are and whether you'll fit into your genes, and whether that means that all this grace stuff may not be working for you after all. Imagine a world where the joy you have felt possibly only once or twice during a song service is just a pencil drawing of the actual blast of bliss that you'll feel when you step into that celestial worship service where angels are dancing and you can barely breathe for joy and excitement, but you're not worried about dying because you'll have finally tasted life. Imagine that. And then imagine sitting on the most luxurious grass by the side of the crystal river with friends and family, and actually being physically and socially at ease. Perhaps there'll be family and friends you've missed for years, or maybe there'll be people you've just met, but you feel like you've known them forever. And imagine sharing the joy of this new, beautiful city and learning the stories of how this new friend learned of your husband. And never wondering what the rest of the people think of you, or whether you're making a good impression, or if they like you, or if they think you're stupid, or if they talk too much, or if they suspect what a sham you are. Imagine a conversation like that. Imagine actually loving the people you're with. Imagine never smelling someone's bad breath or being bored with their conversation and never trying to figure out a way out of it that wouldn't seem too rude. And imagine not having to pretend to listen. Imagine, on the other hand, never worrying what that time is speeding by and you won't have enough time to really get to know this new friend, and never worrying about saying the right thing or the wrong thing or misunderstanding other people's meanings. Imagine that. And then imagine that Jesus, your husband, comes walking up to your group in bodily form. And you know it's him, because he's the one that's got scars. And you say, Lord, we were just talking about you. And he smiles and he says, I was thinking about you too, and I wanted to sit with you. And look, I've brought lunch. And he opens up a basket of the most wonderful food and drink, and you sit together until your hearts and minds and bodies are satiated. And he tells you how he formed the stars by the word of his power, and how much he loved you even then. Imagine that. Imagine watching lions. Yes, kind of like the lions you see here now, and yet more majestic, and watching them play with their cubs while deer are standing by with their fawns, playing without any fear between them or between them and you. Imagine the horses and the birds and the fish and the glorious dogs. Yes, maybe even the dogs you loved here who are made new in your love for them. I'm not going to argue with anybody about that, so don't send me any emails. And I'm also not, well, no, won't go there. And the words they'll say, the words your dogs will say about the love they have for their Creator. Imagine your joyful surprise the first time you hear them speak. And imagine the sky, filled with shimmering rainbows and magnificent beams of light glimmering off the oceans as dolphins perform flips and whales breach and dance in recognition of their king. And imagine the sequoias clapping their hands and resounding in deep praise for their new, yet somehow ancient life. And all of these animals and all of this material world will know nothing of fear or danger or harm or death. Those old things have passed away. Instead, every part of it will be harmonizing together in one long, glorious chorus of hallelujahs forever. And now, I'm going to ask you to do something that you can't do, because I'm going to ask you to imagine that you're seeing colors you've never seen. Colors that are all around us, even now, but are unknown to us because of the fallenness of the color receptors in our eyes. Imagine trying to make up names for these colors. And then you decide it's time for a rest. And you lay down beside still waters without any fear of harm and without any worry that you're not being as productive as you should be, because you've still got so much that you've got to get done that day. And close your eyes and you sleep until you wake up. And you've had nothing but peaceful dreams. No fears of being unloved or excluded or harmed. And you sleep so deeply and you wake up so refreshed that you don't check your watch or your phone to see what time it is or what you've missed, because time doesn't mean anything anymore. And you've got nothing to do now but overflow with joy. And you run your hand over the grass and are amazed at its color and texture and fragrance. And then you get up with ease and wander down to the river where you take a drink and pluck an indescribable piece of fruit from the tree of life. And then you take one bite. And you're overwhelmed with a burst of flavor and the energy and happiness you're infused with. Imagine that. And then you learn that Luther is teaching a class on justification. Or that Tolkien is teaching on imagination. And so you join with others up in the New Jerusalem as you listen to their wisdom and you observe their skill, and you never worry about there not being enough room in the class for you. Or perhaps you take a class from a theoretical physicist or famous astronomer or chemist or physician or philosopher or poet or Bach. And you don't have to worry about not having the brain power to understand, because, after all, you've got eternity. And your sin no longer hinders you. And learning becomes the joy it should always have been. And maybe you take a trip out to a nebula, and you begin to understand how the stars are formed by the word of your husband. And imagine that you sit down to write a song or a sonnet or work on a painting or a mathematical equation or some thorny theological contradiction. And instead of staring at the page or throwing away line after line because you can't get it right, imagine being able to create without being thwarted by the curse. Imagine that. And then you meet with people who treated you wickedly, who lied about you, or gossiped about you, or stole from you, or got you fired, maybe even murdered you. And when you see them, you know that all the justice they deserved for all the wrongs they have done was poured out on the head of your husband, and that they don't owe you anything anymore because you have all you could ever want, and you are now free to love generously. And so you welcome them and shed tears of forgiving joy. And then you see other brothers and sisters and children and parents that you treated wickedly, that you lied about, or gossiped about, or cheated, or stole from, or even murdered. And when you see them, instead of guilt and shame and fear, you know that they have forgiven you and loved you because they too have been forgiven and loved by Jesus. And you take their hand and they take yours and you walk with them and love. And you can hardly remember anything else about your history with them except the love you're sharing together and something Jesus did for you. Imagine that. And imagine walking into the city, the New Jerusalem, built with luminous gold and clear glass walls, filled with every kind of jewel. And surprisingly, when you touched one of the walls, it came alive. And you could see that it was made out of all the good deeds that had ever been done. A woman changing her baby's diaper again. A child sharing his favorite toy. A man persevering in his dead-end, mundane job for the sake of his family, a family that doesn't even seem to care. A martyr standing in faith while his skin caught fire. One neighbor loving another. The entire building constructed out of the good deeds of all the saints and then filled with and made complete and perfect by the righteous deeds of Jesus throughout his entire life. And you could spend forever just looking at this museum of beauty and faith, and you're not intimidated by it or wondering where your portrait is. Because the desire for personal glory and fame has been swallowed up by your husband's glory and his great name. Imagine believing that all the good you do today, when you say thank you to the wait staff here, or share a prayer with a doubting saint, all that good will somehow be purified and then used as the very building materials of the walls in the New Jerusalem. Imagine that your good deeds won't be burnt up at the end of this cosmos, but will be preserved forever as a memorial of the Spirit's power to transform sinners into saints. Imagine that. And imagine sitting down to a wedding feast where the food is unlike anything you've ever tasted, though you may have gotten hints of it when you cut into the first juicy peach of the season and your taste buds exploded and you nearly drowned in your own saliva. Imagine the hall in which the table is set, and it goes on and on and on, and yet you don't feel overwhelmed or insignificant. Imagine not worrying about whether you're using the right fork, or discovering again that you've forgotten again and put your elbows on the table. And imagine the wine that will flow, and yet you won't get drunk or worry about making a fool of yourself again. You won't even ever really worry about indigestion either. And you'll never even think about counting calories or how much you'll have to exercise tomorrow to make up for what you're about to do, You'll be able to eat and, listen, you'll be able to eat and drink without regret. And then imagine looking to where you think the bridal party is seated and seeing the face of Jesus, the one you've been scrounging around looking for in all the gaudy dumpsters of this world, and seeing his face and his smile directed specifically at you. Though you can't think of how that's even possible in this great hall, and then looking down at what you're wearing, realizing that you're the bride. Sorry, guys. You're the bride. And you're gloriously dressed in white linen that has been fashioned out of all the good deeds of all your brothers and sisters. And then suddenly you realize that the love that this husband has is so vast that he can fully satiate with his love all these millions and millions and millions of people from every time and land and ethnicity, and that everyone around you is part of his bride just like you, and that there will never be any jealousy or sorrow or hatred because you fear you're not really loved after all. And then, after seating everyone, he'll put on an apron and serve them a meal, sharing his wedding feast with them as he promised he would. And then you'll cry. But these tears won't be tears of sadness or rage or fear or regret, but of overwhelming joy. And you'll really see him, and you'll know that he really sees you, and that he truly does know you, and that doesn't scare you anymore. Because that old you is finally and completely gone. And you'll hear from his mouth that every sin that you've ever heard you've been absolved of here actually is forgiven. Every sin gone. Every sense of guilt completely erased. Every shame covered over with beauty and holiness and righteousness. Imagine that. And then the king calls for you to rule and reign with him forever. And you can't believe, though you do, that he has exalted you like that. And you spend eternity reigning with him over this new, perfect, gorgeous creation, all in joy and in peace, and work becomes what it was always supposed to be, without any thorns or weeds or labor or pain or sorrow, and all sad things come untrue. Imagine that. My brothers and sisters, imagine there is a heaven, and that sooner than any of us know we will be there. How would that change the way you live right now? If you knew that all of that and more and more and more were true, how free and generous and peaceful and confident and loving would you be today? The Spirit and the bride say, "Come." And let the one who hears say, and let the one who is thirsty, and let the one who desires to take the water of life without price, Jesus says, surely, I am coming soon. Come, Lord Jesus. Now would be good. So we began our time with considering John Lennon's bleak exhortation to imagine a black and white pencil drawing of a material world without any magic, a world where death rules and you just live for today. So instead, let's end our time now singing with Sandra McCracken as she imagines feasting in the house of Zion and living for that day, the day to come. Let's imagine that. And then afterwards, listen, this is how cool this is. We'll have a beautiful dinner together. The folks who sponsor Here We Still Stand love to generously lavish wonderful dinner and wine and fellowship and a time of feasting on you so that you can get a taste of that supper that's coming towards you. That party of the ages. This will be a good party, but there's a party coming. And as wonderful as this party is going to be, it's just hors d'oeuvres compared to the feast that is to come. So let's sing of joys to come, and then let's go out into this black and white world and spread hope and joy and color everywhere. Let's keep our everlasting life in view. All sad things will come untrue. Even so, come, Lord Jesus. Amen.